Hi everybody, welcome to this evening's session on paediatric epilepsy for our education settings. Thank you so much for joining us at this session. We've had a huge number of registrations, which is really excellent. I'm going to lead off straight away as colleagues may continue to join us. For clarity, we've developed this session specifically for settings in the North East and North Cumbria. However, I am aware of some interest in this session from wider than our local geography. Colleagues from outside the North East and North Cumbria region are more than welcome, but just to caveat that this session has been prepared for our region and describes our position and ways of working for the North East and North Cumbria only. Just to advise, this session will be recorded to enable us to make this available to others on our Healthier Together platform following the event. A few points of housekeeping, if I may. Please can participants stay on mute throughout the session unless you're actively taking part in discussion. Because we're a sizable group this evening, this will support and help with bandwidth. Can we ask that participants do not attempt to take control or move the slides along? Sophie and Lisa will move through the slides as they work through their content. We will, of course, share the slides and all the resources following the event with all of those people who were signed up to attend. We will collate the questions that have been asked throughout the chat and obviously in discussion session, and we will collate the responses and make them available following the event. Please can we ask colleagues to introduce themselves in the chat so that we can identify the reach for this education setting and understand the geography that we're able to be linking into. Do feel free to use the chat facility throughout or raise your hand during the session for an opportunity to have a discussion. Please note that we will be sharing this recording and the details of the discussions, so a polite reminder about confidentiality when discussing practical application. Expert colleagues will be responding to the chat facility throughout. By way of introduction then, my name's Louise Dauncey. I'm a Network Delivery Manager for the Child Health and Wellbeing Network. My main role and responsibility is to lead delivery of the Children and Young Persons Transformation Programme here in the North East and North Cumbria. I'm here on behalf of the Child Health and Wellbeing Network and the North East North Cumbria ICS Epilepsy Leadership Group. Next slide, please. So our agenda for this session is just described here on the slide. I will briefly introduce the session and provide some background and context to the work. We'll then hear from Adele Pearson about the relevance of this to education colleagues, and then our expert clinicians will provide an overview about what paediatric epilepsy is, its impact on day-to-day life of a person with epilepsy, and describe how it might affect their education and provide general advice about how to effectively support somebody with epilepsy. This session is interactive and you'll be able to ask questions during the session within the chat function. The session hopes to provide participants with an awareness of epilepsy, its impact, and get some top tips on signposting to credible national resources to help support young people with epilepsy. Next slide, please. I won't go into detail here on this slide, but this just provides some of our local context and children and young persons population data and gives an indication of the size of our geography. The map on the right-hand side shows our 4 area integrated care partnerships and the integrated care system and marks out the 13 local education authority boundary areas, which includes 13 local authorities, 13 public health authorities, 8 acute trusts, 2 mental health trusts and 3 ambulance services, as well as numerous primary care networks. You'll also appreciate that the education system forms a valuable part of our ICS, and within this consider the 1,400 schools and education settings across our huge geography. We operate across a wide geography with diverse population and wide-ranging socioeconomic challenges. You'll be aware that the Core 20+5 framework recognises epilepsy as a clinical area of additional vulnerability. Next slide, please. I won't labour this slide, but just to highlight here the local levels of relative poverty and the challenges here in the North East and North Cumbria. As a professional working in this area, I'm sure that you will be well aware of the socioeconomic challenges locally and the impact of this on health and other outcomes for our children and young persons population. Highlighted here are the highest rates of poverty in the North East and North Cumbria. It is significant that 27% of the children in the North East live in relative poverty when compared with the national average of 20%. The slide also describes some of the suggested ways that we're seeking to overcome challenges, including collaborative work across the system, targeting resource and upskilling our frontline workforce. Next slide, please. The Child Health and Wellbeing Network has a series of priorities that had been determined by consultation as far back as 2018 and 2019. Again, these areas here in that wheel on the left will not be a surprise to colleagues, given what we know about the levels of deprivation in our local area. Within this, the Child Health and Wellbeing Network has a growing role in relation to the Children and Young Persons Transformation Agenda, particularly with respect to additional needs and vulnerability and childhood illness. Our network has an overriding vision which holds children at the centre of all we do. The mission statement here on the right-hand side of the slide outlines the belief that children should be given opportunities to flourish and that this can be enabled by system-wide organisations working cohesively. Our role within the network is about sharing good practice and driving improvement and enabling those platforms for connection. Our network is growing and has broad representation from across the workforce, and we currently stand at over 1,900 members. And I would really encourage you to join if you are not already a member, and there's a link on the slide which will be shared for you to be able to do that. Next slide, please. So you can see here an outline of the various strands of work for the Child Health and Wellbeing Network. Youth Voice is an integral part of our role, and as such, all of our activities focused around young people and families. This work includes a group of young advisors and a young executive who are influential in our governance processes. We have an inequalities focus, and we work closely with the ICB Healthy and Fairer colleagues, and we hold the ring on the Children and Young Persons Core 20+5 framework. We've developed a local framework which is designed to be relevant to multiple and cross-sector approaches. And there's a link here for you to be able to access more information about that and download some supporting resources. Comms and engagements. We provide an ongoing offer of communication, engagement and training, and we have a weekly newsletter which provides and promotes some of these opportunities. Children and Young Persons Integration is a 3-year funded pilot that focuses, as the name suggests, on system-wide education integration, including a number of projects, including Healthier Together, you may have heard of, integrated settings, and Beat Asthma, to name a few, and the Children and Young Persons Transformation Programme. So essentially this is my area of work, and I'll explain a little bit more in the next slide, but this is the basis for our work today as one of the long-term conditions. Next slide, please. So the Children and Young Persons Transformation Programme has 3 main aims in relation to the integration of services, improving the quality of care, outcomes and experience for children and families, and the more ready and active involvement of young people in service design and improvement. Within this, there are 10 strands of work, and epilepsy is one of the long-term conditions that's been identified as a priority. The Children and Young Persons Transformation Programme describes a whole system approach in relation to improvement for paediatric epilepsy care, and through the work of the North East North Cumbria Epilepsy Leadership Group, we're developing a platform with regional leadership and support to oversee the implementation of the long-term plan. The vision for the network is that we can facilitate partnerships and collaborative work between system partners to improve care and outcomes for children and their families. Next slide, please. So we're a small team and we've worked together since 2021 and have delivered a whole programme of work associated with paediatric epilepsy. A few examples of this include the establishment of a multi-agency alliance group to support with the oversight and operationalise some of this service improvement. We've undertaken a series of local quality improvement projects, including digital file transfer pilot, as well as epilepsy specialist nurse increased capacity, and also youth mental health first aid training for our specialist nurse workforce. We're continuing to work with colleagues to increase clinical capacity, and we've also worked recently with the RCPCH to deliver an interactive innovation lab day, which has enabled us to involve young people and families in discussions about epilepsy care. The National Epilepsy Bundle was released in October 2023, and we're undertaking localised service improvement with our acute services in our 8 trusts, in line with the bundle requirements. So Dr. Kumar is our North East North Cumbria clinical lead for paediatric epilepsy. Dr. Jai Chandran is the chair for PENEC, which is the Paediatric Epilepsy Network for the North East and North Cumbria. And Sophie Gilmore-Ivans is our regional strategic ESN lead. Dr. Kumar, Sophie and I are joined by Lisa Emerson and Adele Pearson for the session, who will be available within the chat function and will be able to support with responding to questions from participants during the session and at the end in the discussion session. We're also joined this evening by Carol Wilkinson from the network, who is supporting us with our slides. I'll hand now to Adele Pearson, who is the Child Health and Wellbeing Network System Leader for Education, who has been supporting us as part of the Alliance programme for nearly 2 years now. Adele will provide a brief overview of her role and the relevance of this session to our education colleagues. Thanks, over to you, Adele.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this session. It's absolutely fantastic to see so many different colleagues from different walks of education life here. It's great to see that we've got some EPs joining us and some charity sector colleagues joining us as well. My role within the network, as Louise said, is system leader from education, particularly coming from a SEND background and giving that SEND perspective within the network. So do lots of different work in terms of some of our work streams, but this is a particular area that's close to my heart, being from a SEND background. And I know that our colleagues this evening who are going to be presenting to us will provide us all with some really, really useful and practical information that is going to support us, particularly those working with children with epilepsy within our school setting. So absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you all for attending, because I know you all will have had a very, very busy day in your own settings. So thank you for attending. I will be around in the chat and hopefully can answer any questions from an education perspective, and also available for any system leader questions as well. So thank you. It's my absolute pleasure this evening to introduce our colleagues Sophie and Lisa, who, as I said earlier, have prepared an excellent presentation for us this evening. I know it's going to be really beneficial for us all. So welcome, Sophie and Lisa, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Adele. My name's Sophie Gilmore-Ivans. I am one of the paediatric epilepsy specialist nurses at Northumbria Healthcare, and at the moment I'm also seconded into role as the specialist nurse strategic lead. Next slide, please. I'm going to start with a question. What is epilepsy? So it's a tendency to have recurrent epileptic seizures more than 24 hours apart. It's a variable condition that affects different people in different ways. If we look at the UK population as a whole, approximately 1 in 100 people has epilepsy. And when we think about children and young people, approximately 1 in 200 children and young people who are of school age have epilepsy. 70 to 80% of those children and young people would be fully controlled on medication, but we need to remember that there's another 20 to 30% of children who are more difficult to control. I've put the epilepsies in brackets because of the diversity of types and causes and the fact that we need to remember that it's not a single condition. Next slide, please. So there are various causes of epilepsy. Structural being one of them, and that can be anything that alters the structure of the brain can give rise to epilepsy. This could be a tumour, or a child's brain may develop differently when they are in utero, or they could have had a stroke or a head injury that's altered the structure of their brain and leads them to having epilepsy. There are some epilepsy syndromes that are caused by specific gene changes, and there are other epilepsies which are thought to be caused by the combination of genes that a child has been passed down. So for some gene changes where we know that it's being caused by a single gene, we would call that a known gene change. But for other epilepsies, and those tend to be the epilepsies that we refer to as the genetic generalized epilepsies, which Lisa's going to talk to you about later, that would be presumed genetic cause. Brain infections, whether they're bacterial, viral, fungal, or parasitic, can cause epilepsy. There are neurodegenerative conditions that we see in children that have epilepsy as part of them. And for some children, the cause of their epilepsy remains unknown. Next slide, please. We know that there are coexisting conditions alongside epilepsy. So approximately 40% of children and young people with epilepsy will have a mental health condition, and that is most usually anxiety and/or depression. 6% of children with epilepsy have autism spectrum disorder, and approximately 12% of children with autism also have epilepsy. 30 to 40% of children with epilepsy have ADHD. Approximately 50% have a learning disability, and between 8 and 24%, depending on which research you look at, children with epilepsy have migraine as well. Next slide, please. So another question for you. What is a seizure? It's a sudden and temporary increase of electrical activity within the neurons, which are your brain cells. They can affect part of the brain, and we call these focal seizures, or the whole of the brain from the beginning of the seizure, and these are known as generalized seizures. What a seizure looks like depends on what area of the brain is involved, and you might be surprised to know that there are over 60 different types of seizures. Next slide, please. This is a seizure map which tries to give you a pictorial representation of what I was just talking about focal and generalized seizures. You can see that the Brain on the left has a small purple area to denote a focal seizure, which starts in one area of one lobe of the brain. Because each part of the brain is responsible for a different function, how the seizure presents will depend upon which part of the brain it starts in. For example, you have the occipital lobe at the back of your head, and it's responsible for vision. Therefore, if you have a focal seizure in that area, you might see flashing lights, colours, or simple patterns, and you could also potentially have a loss of vision. We try to say what we see with seizures. Therefore, focal seizures are either described as focal aware seizures, where there's no change in the person's awareness, or focal impaired awareness seizures, where, as the name suggests, there's a change in the person's level of awareness. So during a focal impaired awareness seizure, the child might be able to hear you but not fully understand what you're saying to them, and they might not be able to respond to you, and they definitely won't be able to react as they normally would. We also describe focal seizures as motor or non-motor seizures. Motor seizures, as the name suggests, are seizures involving movements such as jerking or repeated movements. And focal non-motor seizures are when the main symptoms don't involve the muscles. They can include things like changes in emotion, thinking, and sensations. And examples of this would be experiencing déjà vu, getting an unusual smell or taste, a sudden intense feeling of fear or joy, a feeling of numbness or tingling. And as I've said before, what happens will depend upon which area of which lobe of the brain the seizure has started in. Underneath the focal seizures, you can see focal to bilateral tonic-clonic seizure. This is when a seizure starts in one area of the brain and the electrical activity spreads to the rest of the brain, or the majority of the rest of the brain, and the child or young person goes from having a focal seizure into a tonic-clonic seizure, tonic meaning stiffness and clonic meaning jerking, which is the type of seizure that most people think of when they think about an epileptic seizure. On the right side of the seizure map are generalized seizures. This is when the whole or the majority of the brain is affected by the seizure from the beginning, and the child or young person will lose consciousness with these seizures, albeit only briefly for some of them. And again, we try to say what we see. So atonic seizures are seizures without tone, and someone falls limply to the ground, somewhat like a puppet with the strings cut. Tonic seizures are stiff seizures. Tonic-clonic seizures, as I mentioned before, are seizures where there is stiffness followed by jerking. Myoclonic seizures, myo means muscle and clonic means jerking. So these are seizures involving muscle jerks. They can affect a single hand or foot, or the head, or one half of the body, or sometimes they affect the whole body, and the child will fall, a bit like the movement you see when one child kicks another child behind the knees and they drop suddenly. Absent seizures are the most common seizures that you see in primary age school children, and I won't talk about them in too much detail as Lisa is going to do this later in the presentation. However, essentially the child looks like they are blank for a short period of time, and although their eyes are open, they're not conscious or aware of what's happening around them. Next slide, please. This is not an exhaustive list of triggers or provoking factors for seizures. However, these are some of the common ones we see. I think probably the most common one I see in my practice is illness with or without a temperature, and probably lack of sleep or disrupted sleep. I've put hormonal changes and menstruation because in girls, menstruation can be a trigger. So even if their seizure control is good for the rest of the month, the hormonal changes associated with their period can trigger seizures. And this is usually in the 2 to 3 days before the period starts, or in the first 2 to 3 days of menstruation itself. And sometimes girls and women can have seizures around the time that they ovulate due to the hormonal changes associated with ovulation. If children or young people aren't taking their medication properly, this could also cause seizures. Most anti-seizure medications are given twice a day, every day, as close to 12 hours apart as possible. And if children are missing doses or there's no routine to when they're being given their medication, it increases the likelihood of them having seizures. I've put flashing lights and photosensitivity on the list, as there is a common misconception that everyone with epilepsy is photosensitive. However, realistically, it's about 3 to 4% of people with epilepsy, and I'm going to discuss this more on the next slide. Next slide, please. Photosensitivity is not just about flashing lights, and seizures could also be triggered by things like high contrasting patterns, such as stripes or bars with contrasts of light and dark, and these patterns are more likely to be a trigger if they are changing direction or flashing, rather than if they are still or moving slowly in one direction. Things that have been reported to me as being triggers are sunlight through slatted blinds or through the trees when you're driving down a tree-lined road, or sunlight reflecting off the waves at the beach, or light through a moving ceiling fan. Similarly, an animated background on a Zoom or Teams call or a moving escalator can also trigger a seizure, and it could be any type of seizure that's triggered, but tonic-clonic seizures, again, stiff followed by jerking seizures, are the most common. In schools, if you want to try and minimise the risk of a seizure in a child who's photosensitive, you can make sure the room is well lit so there's less of a contrast between the screen and the rest of the room. You could use an anti-glare filter, or if the child or young person says that they're feeling odd or they just don't seem right, get them to cover one eye with the palm of their hand, turn them away from the possible trigger and remove them from the possible trigger. Please don't let them close both eyes, as this could make things worse. Next slide, please. I've put this slide in about conditions that mimic epileptic seizures as there are quite a few other conditions that could be mistaken for epilepsy, and it's really important that we make the right diagnosis. Daydreaming or inattention can be mistaken for absent seizures, and a child who is actually having absent seizures can be mistaken for regularly daydreaming or being inattentive before they're actually diagnosed. Young people with diabetes, or actually any child who has an extremely low blood sugar, could have a seizure if their blood sugar drops. Dissociative seizures are events involving uncontrolled movements, sensation, or behaviour that are not caused by the abnormal electrical activity in the brain that causes epileptic seizures. To the untrained eye, they might look just like an epileptic seizure, but there are subtle differences that allow those of us working in epilepsy to tell the difference. Lisa's going to provide a link to a website later in the presentation, which gives you more information about dissociative or functional seizures, as they're sometimes called. Febrile seizures are seizures that occur when a child under the age of 6 has a temperature, and febrile seizures are 10 times more common than epilepsy. Some of the symptoms of migraine, movement disorders, parasomnias, which are sudden attacks of behaviour in sleep, tics or Tourette's syndrome, and panic attacks can be mistaken for focal seizures, and syncope, which is fainting, can be mistaken for a tonic-clonic seizure, as more than 75% of people who faint will have brief jerking movements when they are on the floor. Next slide, please. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Lisa, who will expand upon absent seizures, discuss epilepsy syndromes, and first aid with you.
Thanks, Sophie. So my name's Lisa Emerson. I'm one of the children's epilepsy nurses based in South Tyneside and Sunderland NHS Foundation Trust, and I work in the Sunderland side of the trust. So to talk about absent seizures. So approximately 10% of children and young people with epilepsy have absent seizures. And we look at typical absences first. So children and young people, they would suddenly stop, stare into space, wouldn't respond to people around them. We may see flutter of the eyelids, and we can see slight jerking movements of the body or limbs. We can sometimes see automatisms, which are purposeless, repetitive movements, so sometimes smacking of the lips, fidgeting of the fingers, chewing motion of the mouth. On average, it would last around 5 to 20 seconds, and the episodes can occur in clusters. So we can have one episode after another, but we can also have single episodes. We can have more atypical absences, so they would typically last longer, more like 20 to 30 seconds, and often start and stop more slowly. They can involve a change of tone, and the person may be able to respond during an event, but not a normal response. And some people can walk during that kind of episode as well. So just thinking about the safety, which we'll cover later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So this is a video taken from Epilepsy Action, and it just gives you an example of a typical absence seizure in a primary age school child.
Teddy bear, turn around. Teddy bear, touch the ground. Teddy bear, show your shoe. Teddy bear, that will do. Next. It's me next. No, it isn't. Yeah, it is. It's in the alphabet. Next is B for Beth. Me. No, it's oldest and I'm the second oldest after Adele. Isn't that right, Adele? My birthday's after yours. Yeah? Am I not next? No, you, Miss Shaw said you were chasing Jack Garrett. Give me the rope, Ted. I had a little puppy, his name was Tiny Tim. But you're out, my turn. I still was not out, it wasn't me. It was Katie. What? It was you. You stopped the rope. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Right, I'm still in. I had a little puppy, his name was Tiny Tim. Katie, why do you keep stopping the rope? Come on then, Katie, give me the rope. It's so not fair.
Are you okay, Katie?
Do you keep stopping the rope when it's my turn?
It's okay, Sally. Are you okay, Katie?
I'm fine, sir.
Okay, carry on, girls.
Right, so can we start again then? I had a little puppy.
So just thinking about what you've seen in that video, nobody really noticed that episode was happening before the girl became involved in the skip and rope activity, but you did have two small absence seizures, one after the other. So when we talked about clusters, and then once she became involved in the skip and rope activity, our friends were saying, why are you stopping the rope? She just blanked out. You've seen a very subtle eyelid flutter, very easily missed, as I'm sure you could appreciate in a busy class environment if the activity hadn't been ongoing. And then she had another one. She clearly didn't respond to the teacher when he called her name. So thinking about that distraction. So we'd say a verbal prompt. If someone doesn't respond to their name, we'd often say physical touch, little tap on the shoulder as an example, because it may be that someone's deeply concentrating on something else, they didn't hear you, and we need to determine whether this could be daydreaming or not. So that's a typical absence seizure. Sometimes I find on occasion we do have some children where they can also have an accident with the bladder with this kind of seizure. It's not common, but it's not unheard of. Next slide, please. So we're going to just look in the context of epilepsy syndrome. So typically what you've just seen in the last video, often referred to as CAE, childhood absence epilepsy. So we typically see this in around 1 in 5 primary age school children would have this kind of epilepsy. So would start around the age of 4 to 10 years, and we can have typical or atypical absences. Seizures more likely when sitting quiet, tired or unwell, but in that video you've obviously seen it when the girl was engaged in an activity, and can be associated with attention, memory and language problems. And about 6 out of 10 children with this kind of epilepsy we would expect to outgrow by the time they reach teenage years, but sometimes it can evolve into other epilepsy syndromes. So we have juvenile absence epilepsy and juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. Next slide, please. So juvenile absence epilepsy would typically be around 2 to 3 out of every 100 children and young people with epilepsy would have this particular type. Would usually start around the age of 9 to 13, but it could start later. And the absences are often less frequent, but the seizures last longer, often up to around 30 seconds. And about 1 in 5 children and young people with this may have what we call status epilepticus in absence, where the seizures last more than 30 minutes. 9 out of 10 will go on to have generalized tonic-clonic seizures, and this is where we can often differentiate if a child's of an age where it's unclear if it's childhood or juvenile absence. It may be difficult to tell at that point, but if they go on to develop generalized tonic-clonic seizures, then we would give a diagnosis of juvenile absence, because we don't see tonic-clonic seizures in childhood absence epilepsy. Some of these children and young people are photosensitive. Around 1 in every 10 to 20 may be photosensitive, and around 8 to 10 would be seizure-free on medication. But as you can see from the final point there, this is a lifelong diagnosis, so very different in terms of the childhood. This will go on into the young person's adult life. Next slide, please. Juvenile myoclonic epilepsy. So around 1 out of 10 people with epilepsy will have this particular type. Usually starts again in the teenage years, but it can be younger or older. About a third of children and young people will also have a family member with epilepsy. And the particular seizure types we would see would be myoclonic, that muscle jerk, absence, generalized tonic-clonic. The person may have, a combination, 1 or 2 or all 3 of those seizure types. And again, about 9 out of 10 of children and young people with this kind of epilepsy will have generalized tonic-clonic seizures. A third have absences and a third photosensitive. And again, it's a lifelong diagnosis, but seizures may get better as people actually get older. And all 3 of these epilepsies are likely to be genetic. Next slide, please. So this one I've just wanted to talk about because it's something that you'd commonly see in primary age school pupils, and it's changed its name several times over the years. So it's currently called self-limited epilepsy with centrotemporal spikes, selects, as you can see in brackets. Previously known as benign Rolandic epilepsy, and then it was known as SECTS, which was childhood epilepsy with centrotemporal spikes. So it's changed the terminology over the years. About a fifth of young people, children and young people, will have this diagnosis of selects. Again, starts typically in primary age, 4 to 10, and it would be focal seizures is how we find these present. So typical tingling, fizzy buzzing feeling, often in one side of the mouth, difficulty speaking. Parents will often say to me, I thought they were having a stroke, they couldn't get their words out. So quite scary for parents to see that. And we'd see twitching or stiffness to one side of the mouth or face, and often drooling. This focal seizure can become a bilateral tonic-clonic seizure, meaning that the activity spreads from focal to the rest of the brain, and the person goes on to have a tonic-clonic seizure. And sometimes parents find the child in the tonic-clonic seizure and they haven't seen the beginning. So therefore, initially it's thought to be that, but then as time evolves and the history is taken, we find out that it's this kind of epilepsy. Nearly all children and young people would grow out of this by their 16th birthday. Some of the children don't ever need to go on regular medication, depending on the frequency of episodes, but some people will need to. And around 2 in 100 people will develop epilepsy as an adult. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at some focal seizures now. So this is actually a focal seizure with impaired awareness. So I'll let you watch the video first.
Have you got anything? I'm starving.
You just had something at break.
I know, but I'm a grown girl, aren't I?
You've got one small life.
Ew. Ow! Hey, you little geek! Have you done your LCT homework yet?
I'm telling you, it's well hard. Started doing it last night, and then I started texting Edda, and I can't believe that. He's gonna be late yet again. Hayley, what are you looking at? Miss?
Girls, you should be in lessons.
Miss, it's Hayley.
Justine, I need you to calm down. Hayley? Hayley, it's Miss Baxter. I'm just going to get you to sit down for a minute. Let's pop into Miss Renshaw's class. That's it. Justine's going to come too, aren't you, love? That's it, love. Just pop in here and have a sit down for a minute.
Should we be alright, Miss?
Yeah, don't worry, Justine. You alright, Hayley? Just have one of your seizures. No, are you going to be alright, or do you want me to call your mum?
I'll be alright.
Okay. Well, you take a couple of minutes here, and then we'll go on through to class. You look after her. I'm just going to let Mr. Phillips know you're going to be late.
So thinking about that was a focal seizure with impaired awareness. So the girl Hayley there with the jacket on and the braids in her hair was walking down the corridor, and then she suddenly stopped in her tracks. Our friend asked what she was looking at. So if you remember, Sophie mentioned about some people can maybe visually see something. So might have a visual hallucination or an auditory one. Maybe she could see something our friend clearly couldn't. And she grabbed onto her friend. I think she had quite a scared look on her face. Maybe she was having a scared emotion. And then you've seen her repeatedly plucking at the front of her jacket. And that's one of the automatisms, the purposeless movement that we mentioned. And there was very subtle kind of chewing motion of the mouth, although you couldn't kind of see a close-up on that video. So they were an automatism part of the seizure. You wouldn't necessarily recognise or interpret that as a seizure. She clearly couldn't respond to her friend during it, but maybe afterwards she could say, well, actually, I could hear you talking to us, but I couldn't respond. And I think she looked quite wiped out and drained. Obviously, just needed to sit down and rest, maybe just pull herself together, try to maintain within the school day, and probably needed just 20-30 minutes before she was back to her normal self. Similarly, with the girl who had the absence in the previous video, she recovered very quickly. So I think this kind of wiped her out a lot more. So that was a focal seizure with impaired awareness. Next slide, please. So thinking about first aid for focal seizures. So it's about guiding them away from danger. So you could see our friend was just ensuring that she was okay. Obviously, they were walking down a corridor, but just think about the environment in which that might happen. So safety around roads, stairs, open water, for example. Just being calm and reassuring, because you don't know what that person's experiencing, if that's a scary experience for them, and what they can actually hear or understand. Avoid doing anything that might frighten them, no sudden movements. Don't shake or shout at them in any way, and just stay with them. And that's what the teacher ensured she did. You stay with her. I'll go and let the class teacher know that you're going to be late, and just reorientate and explain anything that they may have missed. If the child and young person is conscious, they don't need to be replaced in the recovery position. So you're seeing they just let her sit down, until she pulled herself together. Next slide, please. So this is a video of a generalized tonic-clonic seizure. So tonic meaning stiff, clonic meaning jerk. So we'll just have a watch of this video now.
Right, girls, we're going to have to do that again from the top. It's just not good enough. When you're on stage, everybody can see you. There is nowhere that you can hide. You two at the back, you'll be seen, so concentrate, please. From the beginning, following me. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. 3, 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 3, 4. 5, 2, 3, 4. 6, 2, 3. The ending. Why are you all coming up at different times? That last beat, you've all got to come up together, or you're going to look ridiculous. Try it one more time. I'll face this way, see if that helps. Following me. 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 2, 3, 4. 3, 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 3, 4. 5.
Why is she shaking like that? What's she doing?
You just move back a little bit, please.
She's still shaking.
Right, Sarah, can you go and get Mr. Bosworth for me? Joanne, can I have your jumper? All of you, can you just go and wait in the corner for me over there? Hi, Molly. It's Miss Sharp. We're in the gym, and you're okay, but you've had one of your seizures. You're going to be just fine. All right, I just need you to relax. Try your best to rest. Good girl, that's right. You're doing really well. Try your best.
Right, next slide, please. So just thinking about the first aid for generalised tonic-clonic seizures. So obviously it's assessing that situation where that seizure happens. Probably not going to be in a gym with a crash mat behind you for the sake of the video there, but thinking, is the person in immediate danger? So if they're in immediate danger, we tend to say fire, traffic, water, clearly you're going to get them out of that. Otherwise, you deal with a situation where it happens. So if it was classroom, school, corridor, out in the playground, try not to move the person. If there's chairs and tables in the way, clear the environment in the area so they're not going to injure themselves. Try and stay calm. Ask for assistance from another adult or first aid staff and note the time the seizure starts, because some children may be prescribed emergency medication depending on what it states in their epilepsy care plan as to when to call an ambulance. So for some children that could be at the onset of a seizure after 5 minutes, for example. Cushion the child's head. You're seeing the teacher just grab what was available, which was somebody's hoodie, popped it under her head just to protect that from injury, and move any harmful objects like I've just said. Once the jerking stopped, to help aid the breathing, you're seeing the teacher put her in the recovery position after that jerking has stopped. Obviously, some people can be sick. You don't want them to be sick if they're lying on the back and they may produce more saliva. So if they're on the side, that'll obviously, help that drain out. Think about privacy and dignity, because some people can have an accident with their bladder or their bowels during a seizure. So whatever you have handy to be able to cover them up, because if that's happened in a public place, obviously that's embarrassing for them as they come round. It may not happen, and that may differ from seizure to seizure, but just be aware that that could happen. And don't put anything in the child's mouth. Please don't put your fingers in. Lots of old wives' tales about that. You will just get your fingers bitten. So nothing in the child's mouth other than emergency medication if that's required. And please don't give them anything to eat or drink after a seizure, because they could cough and choke, and that could go down the wrong way, because they can be very drowsy, very tired after a seizure, and especially if they've required emergency medication, then they may not be able to maintain their own airway, and we don't want it to go down the wrong way. Thinking about when you contact an ambulance, I'd just like to kind of raise awareness that we're finding probably over about the last 2 years, North East Ambulance Service is frequently asking people to go and locate a defibrillator. I'm aware that the majority of schools now have these on site, but I'd just like to raise awareness of this, because it can be alarming if you're asked to go and do that. We appreciate this is not a cardiac arrest, but any category 1 or category 2 calls, which a seizure falls into that category, they will often ask you to go and locate a defibrillator, and it can be used as a form of cardiac monitor. So please don't be alarmed if you're asked to do that by the ambulance control call handler. Next slide, please. So this is just giving you a visual, really, first aid poster provided from Young Epilepsy. And it is just going through timing the seizure, keeping the person away from hazards, don't restrict or restrain any movements. You're seeing the teacher just let her body work its way through the seizure, stayed with her, reassured her, put her over into the recovery position, making a record of what happened, crucial to be timing that, and obviously contacting the ambulance, as we've previously discussed there, depending on the young person's care plan. If it's a first seizure, you would always be contacting an ambulance at the onset. Next slide, please. So safety advice for children and young people with epilepsy. So thinking about heat, so hot radiators, fires, kettles in the home environment or even in the school environment, ovens and hobs, thinking about sensible adjustments within those environments, turning pan handles in, no trailing flexes, etc., Bunsen burners in science lessons, for example. So what I would often say is for the young person to work in a buddy system, not be, near those things where they could be at risk of scalds or burns if they had a seizure, so they can participate in the activity but not be taking hot dishes in and out of the oven, for example. And the same within a science lesson, just being mindful of risk assessing any tasks. Heights, no heights should be unharnessed, so we wouldn't want people climbing freely up high trees, wall bars, or harnessed height like rock climbing or abseiling, if they were doing an outward bound residential course, would be fine as long as seizures were well controlled. It clearly wouldn't be sensible if someone was having daily seizures. It would be about risk assessing the frequency of their seizures at the time that activity was going to happen. Traffic, so we shouldn't be cycling on roads with epilepsy, sticking to cycle paths. We should always be wearing a protective helmet. We should all be doing that anyway to protect our brains from injury, more so with seizures. Thinking about other activities like go-kart and quad biking, driving, we must be seizure-free for a year before we can participate in those kind of activities. And again, they should be risk assessed. Showers are obviously safer than baths, because if you have a seizure, water will run down the plug hole, but you're not going to slip under the water and drown. So just again, thinking about the person's safety. Swimming, so we'd say no swimming or water sports in open water until seizure-free for 1 year. Pool swimming, appropriate supervision. So thinking from a school perspective, we know in mainstream school, you know, we don't have one-to-one in terms of for that young child, but we need one-to-one supervision around swimming. So if there was 30 children in the class, we want one set of eyes on the child with epilepsy, so you can alert the lifeguard or the swimming coach that a seizure's happened. If it was a seizure like an absence, for example, you would just safely guide them out of the water. If it was a tonic-clonic seizure, then what we'd say is maintain the head above water until you can get help to safely get them out. What you don't want to do is go down and under with the young person. Next slide, please. So thinking about the impact of epilepsy on children and young people, so attendance, so time off for appointments, you know, thinking about attending clinic appointments, days off after seizures, and everyone's individual. They may recover very quickly, but they may need time off. And also medication side effects, you know, could impact on education and learning and just participating socially. Behaviour, so epilepsy itself or medication, you know, can sometimes have an impact on behaviour in terms of hyperactivity, aggression or challenging behaviour. Learning, children and young people may have problems with memory, attention, concentration or processing of information. And mental health, so approximately 40% of children and young people have a coexisting mental health disorder. And just kind of to make people aware, we're all aware that there's very long waiting lists for CAMHS and SIPs, but we have been in the area, the Child Health and Wellbeing Network have been doing a mapping exercise through Children North East earlier this year, and that's a voluntary community and social enterprise, and it's looked at there's about 60 organisations in the region that are delivering low-level mental health, resilience and wellbeing type grassroots services for children and young people, and there will be a spreadsheet produced from the Child Health and Wellbeing Network, which can be filtered locally out to the paediatric epilepsy teams as a starting point while children are maybe on waiting lists for SIPs and CAMHS. Sleep, so we know seizures and medication can disrupt sleep, or not getting enough sleep can be a trigger for seizures or make children and young people sleepy. And just the general stigma around epilepsy, misunderstanding of the condition and the potential of bullying within the school environment. Next slide, please. So the impact of children and young people. So this is a tool that is kind of provided by Young Epilepsy, and you can see the link there, and it's called the Epilepsy Able tool, which is an assessment of behaviour and learning in epilepsy, and it's a screening tool that looks at the effects on epilepsy in pupils in education, performance and achievement, but it enables both teachers and parents to work together to identify areas of cognition and behaviour that may be impacting on learning. So just a useful link for you there. Next slide, please. What can you do? So epilepsy education, training like we've provided today, online training through your local epilepsy specialist nurse. And there's some, again, some links of what's available. So we have basic epilepsy for schools on epilepsy action, and then our advanced sessions as well, and also training courses on young epilepsy, recording seizures. So that's really helpful for us. We do appreciate within a school environment that can be quite difficult, but it's really, really helpful when when they come to clinic, so we can see a seizure, and actually a very good written account in a seizure diary, so we know what's happening between home and school. Reasonable adjustments for safety, which we've already discussed around risk assessments, etc. And just remembering coexisting conditions that person might have, you know, autism or ADHD alongside their epilepsy, for example. Next slide, please. This is just a list of the paediatric epilepsy specialist nurses in the region and their contact numbers. So it's all of the areas that are covered within the North East and Cumbria region. Next slide, please. And this is just some resources. So Epilepsy Action, Epilepsy Society, the FND Action is the one that Sophie mentioned earlier. So this is the functional neurological disorder. So the functional seizures or dissociative seizures that we can sometimes see, which is not an epileptic seizure, but that's a really good resource just to kind of signpost people to that. Healthier Together, Medicines for Children and Young Epilepsy. So there's lots of resources out there that would help in gathering further information that you may require access to. Next slide, please. And thank you, everyone. So if there's any questions at all, more than happy to take them. Thank you for attending today.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. That was excellent. And Sophie, thank you for the presentations. So I can see there within the chat function that there's been lots and lots of great discussion, lots of conversations about how to manage anxiety in young people and their parents, also discussions about contacting the ambulance and you know, recording the different times of seizure, and also looking particularly around access to training for schools from the epilepsy specialist nurses. So what we'll do is we'll collect all of those questions and answers up into a document that we will provide as a kind of supporting resource for this presentation. So all that's left for me to say is a huge thank you to all the participants for taking the time to join us tonight, and also to our clinical staff team and others who have supported the session tonight, and obviously with those great presentations. I appreciate that a huge amount of information has been imparted today, and we hope that this has been useful to colleagues within education settings, you know, those people who've been involved in tonight's session. We have created an evaluation form to try and get a bit of feedback about this session in terms of its content and the timing, etc. So it would be really great if you could perhaps complete that to let us know whether or not you know, we've hit the nail on the head and what further information may be required. And obviously we will be producing all of this in the form of a video and also the supporting resources, and they will be circulated to all of those who've signed up and registered to be part of this session, as well as making them available, being available on our Healthier Together platform, and we'll provide a link to the recording of the session so you can onwardly share. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time. It's a great session, and we will speak to you soon. Thank you. Good night.